literally just at a yield sign now. It's doing it again. When you try and pull off and accelerate.
Search AutoTrader.
This is the Jetour dashing. Now, Jetour is part of the Chery group globally, but from a South African perspective, Moto, JQ, and Chery are their own thing, and Jetour is its own thing. But just know that globally, it is part of the same company. They share platforms and drivetrains, and this Jetour is no different. This particular model that we're looking at is the dashing. There's also the X70, which there'll be a review on AutoTrader shortly, and next year, we'll have the T1 and the T2, which everyone is looking quite forward to. Now, from a design perspective, many have compared this to the Lamborghini Urus. There's a bit of Lotus in here, and indeed some Maserati Grecale, whereas at the rear, I've heard people saying it looks a bit like a Lexus. It's certainly good company to be compared to when you consider this car is under 500,000 Rand. And when we head inside, you'll see it's also pretty decent. Now, there are two models within the Jetour dashing range, the Momentum and the Deluxe. The Momentum starts at around 440,000 Rand, and the Deluxe goes up 30,000 Rand to around 470,000 Rand. And for that additional 30,000 Rand, you get a few more semi-autonomous goodies. You get a surround view camera in addition to the standard rear view camera, and a panoramic sunroof. But to be honest, I think the entry-level model is all you really need. This car is very nicely specified, and from an interior perspective, I find it to be reasonably well put together. I haven't noticed any rattles or squeaks. The design seems to have been nicked from Mercedes-Benz in many ways. You get that slab-style infotainment system that you see many Mercedes and indeed Chery products. There's also a Mercedes-esque look to this steering wheel over here. And the sporty seats are not really befitting of a crossover, but they do look quite good. There's loads of features in here. The infotainment system works okay. You've got wireless Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. The instrument cluster is digitized, not as configurable as I would like, and certainly not class leading, but definitely acceptable at this price point. You get a wireless smartphone charger over here and a little storage area, and above that you can control the climate control panel, which is a physical setup, and you don't have to go into the infotainment system, which is a big plus. Back here you get a cup holder, and this is a refrigerated or chilled storage area, which is great. As in traditional Chinese car fashion, rear occupant space is fantastic. You get loads of head and legroom, and similarly you get over 480 liters of boot space, making this a super practical product. But as with many of these new Chinese products, we have to take it out on the road and drive it to see what it's really like. Here we are out on the road in the Jetour dashing, and as you may have gathered from the start of this video, both the exterior and interior of the dashing, as well as its perceived value proposition at around 470,000 Rand, that includes a 5-year 60,000 kilometer service plan, a 5-year 150,000 kilometer warranty, and a 7-year million-kilometer engine warranty. This all sounds great, but I'm afraid things start to become a bit unraveled when we head out onto the road. Now, one of the issues I have with the car is something that you may be able to live with, but the second thing is something any potential Jetour owner needs to be cognizant of. First thing is the calibration of the drivetrain. Now, what that means is the way the gearbox and the throttle response speak to one another. So in many Chinese products, we've noticed a very sharp throttle response, which is often mitigated by the use of an eco mode to dull things down a bit. Now in this car, I've flicked to eco mode, which dulls things down a bit. However, the problem with these dual clutch gearboxes is when you put the car into that eco mode and you try and pull off normally, you get this horrible shudder that comes through the entire drivetrain, and it feels like the car is going to stall. It's almost like in a manual car when you depress the clutch at too low an RPM and the car starts to sort of shudder along, and that's exactly what happens here. Or conversely, if you are a bit too overzealous on the throttle input, the car is going to engage the the clutch is going to engage and you're going to jerk backwards, and it doesn't create a very pleasant driving experience at all. Now, this is a problem across multiple Chinese products that have got dual clutch gearboxes and turbocharged petrol engines, but this particular application has been the most prominent I've ever noticed this issue in a car. Now, you might say, Sean, I can most certainly live with that, and you will get used to driving the car and it will become better. So here's an example right now. The car is struggling to pull off and it shudders, and then it sort of grabs and goes. It's a very frustrating thing to drive at low RPM, and it has this perceived lag about its drive. And if we look at the fuel consumption achieved in this Jetour dashing here, and we compare it to, let's say, the best-selling car in the compact crossover segment from a passenger car perspective is the Toyota Corolla Cross. And let's look at it in hybrid, guys, because at around this price point, the 450 to 500,000 Rand mark, you could get the hybrid version. I've tested that car personally and achieved around 5.5 to 5.7 liters per 100 kilometers in the model. And if you compare what I achieved in this car, which is around 10.4 liters per 100 kilometers, that's roughly 5 liters per 100 kilometers more than a Toyota Corolla Cross hybrid can achieve. Now, if you are filling up once a week, for example, and it costs you roughly 1,200 bucks to fill up that tank, and let's say you are doing that in this car because you cover around 400 Ks a week, that 1,200 bucks in the Corolla Cross becomes 600 or 700 bucks a week. And you can see how, if you extrapolate that over a month and over a year, the Cross becomes quite a bit cheaper to run than this car. Even if the initial cost price of the Toyota is a little bit more, you're probably going to get that back in fuel savings. And I haven't even approached the topic of depreciation, because Jetour is a new model within the market. And I'm not just referring to Toyota as a comparative barometer for this car. Take any of the established brands. Take something from Kia or Hyundai as an example. They're going to have better resale value than a Jetour. So I encourage you, if you're shopping in this segment, I'm not trying to bash Chinese cars and make you think you shouldn't go out and consider buying these cars. I think there is some value to be had in them, but you need to go into it educated, knowing what you're going to get, or else you're going to buy it and regret having a car that's so heavy on fuel. So take into consideration your total mobility costs. Whether you drive the car on your test drive and you do an extended test on it and you do your own fuel consumption figures, or you take what automotive journalists have achieved in the car and you do your own calculation as to how much it's going to cost you in fuel, in insurance, and your monthly installments. Do that total mobility cost and then compare it with some other products within its price range and see which one would make the most sense for you financially before you pull the trigger, or else you're going to get to a point where you've bought a car, you think you've gotten something that's value-filled, but perhaps the fuel consumption knocks it out of favor for you. So I'm just trying to get you to consider the total mobility cost. If we look at other things with this Jetour that I perhaps enjoy a bit more than the drivetrain, ride quality, general refinement is not bad at all. At freeway speeds, there's not too much cabin intrusion, ride quality is decent, and the car is okay on the open road. You don't really notice the engine or the gearbox issues on the open road. It's mostly in city driving situations. Like, I've literally just at a yield sign now, it's doing it again. When you try and pull off and accelerate, it starts to shudder and you don't really pull off properly, so you accelerate a little bit more and then you can feel the car sort of kick back, and it's not a pleasant experience. And that brings me to, well, the next topic I'd like to discuss in this video, and that is, are there too many Chinese products now entering South Africa? And I think the short answer is yes. I don't think it's necessarily too many products. I think it's too many products too quickly. I think many brands have seen the success of the likes of Chery and GWM, who, by the way, at the time of recording in December of 2024, Chery had just announced it sold over 2,000 cars in November of 2024. That's excluding Omoda and Jetour, who sold over 700. So if you had to take Omoda, Jetour and Chery, who are all under the same brand in South Africa, that's 2,700, nearly 2,800 cars alone. And if you look at GWM, that's over 1,500 cars sold in the month. So when other Chinese brands have a look at this market, they see that there's an appetite for these new products, especially these compact SUVs, which seem to be the vehicle type that people are gravitating towards now. And why wouldn't they? For the price of a fairly highly spec'd Volkswagen Polo, you can get yourself a compact crossover SUV like this, which is much bigger and has the same amount of kit. And you can see why it makes sense. But the things I mentioned earlier about fuel consumption, it applies to many of these Chinese products, but not all of them. And then we get to the problem of choice. There are so many new Chinese brands in South Africa. Think about the established brands I mentioned earlier. There's several sub-brands within Chery, and if you count Jetour as one of those, there's 4 products that emanate from Chery in South Africa. And if you look at GWM, you've got Haval, GWM, you've got P-Series, you've got Tank, and you've got Aura, just under that brand alone. Then you look at things like GAC that have just come in. MG has announced that it's arriving in South Africa too. I'm attending an event for a company called Dongfeng. There is BYD, who have brought EVs to South Africa and will be bringing a hybrid, and indeed a hybrid bakkie, to South Africa next year. That's excluding brands like JAC and several other Chinese brands that are set to make a debut in the local market. Now, the problem isn't that they're being introduced. The problem is that I just don't know where this perceived volume of customers is going to come from for these cars. Now, the logical conclusion to come to is that either these brands succeed in the market and take out some of the more established brands in South Africa, or they kind of drag the entire thing down with them and only a certain number of these Chinese brands really survive. It's, I think, a case of many of the legacy automakers struggling to compete with these brands on price, but now these Chinese brands are fighting amongst themselves for market share, and indeed when they come into the market, it's just going to become more and more competitive. Once we have the MGs of the world, we've now got GAC, we've got Chery, and we've got multiple brands under Chery, we've got multiple brands under GWM. There's so much choice for consumers before you even start considering the established brands that have been around, and there's many of those too. So I'm just not sure where all of this volume is going to come from. I don't know where these brands anticipate consumers to just appear out of nowhere. And in many ways, if you're a brand like a Honda or a Subaru or a Mazda, I would be quite worried from a South African perspective, because those brands have struggled really in the past few years because of their pricing for the products that they offer. And if I was a brand like a Mazda or a Honda or a Subaru, I would be worried that these newly established Chinese brands within the local market would ultimately end my participation in the local market. I don't know what you guys think. Let me know in the comment section. Let me know what you think of this Jetour. I was quite let down by the drive, but I think it looks quite good. It's got a nice interior, but you have to be wary of that fuel consumption. It kind of negates the value proposition that the car provides. But that's all I have for you today. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. Hit the like button below if you've enjoyed this, and comment below. Let us know what you'd like us to compare next, or what you'd like us to review next. And until next time, cheers.
Search AutoTrader.